Hi guys, this is going to be the tutorial video of the previous video of the Artemis music demo in FMod, which was a stealth action exploration sort of music track. And we were looking at the jump transitions, and we were looking at this intensity automation layering technique. And we're going to actually recreate this from scratch so you guys can kind of do this on your own if you want to. This is sort of a really basic technique, but what's different about this one is that there's 4 layers and it's actually pretty intense, but we're just going to make 3 layers and see how we do with that first. So let's start by making a new event. I'm going to call this one tutorial. And what I did was I right-clicked in the events and made a new event. And your blank project here is just going to look like any sort of digital audio workstation like Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton Live, or FL Studio. And it's kind of this way because this program really caters to musicians and audio producers. So let's look at our source material. Let's look at our source material again. And remember, we had this sort of ambient menu loop. It was just mostly ambience. And this is our exploration loop. And moving on to an enemy encounter. Now I do want to say, to make sure that this project you're doing is successful, is making sure that your source material that you're making to use in FMod really fits the aesthetic of the game and works really well functionally in FMod and can be looped, segmented together and crossfaded with each other. And I was keeping in mind that when I was making the music that I was going to be using this crossfading technique into the game. So having good source material is a must, or else your FMod project won't really work so well. So let's actually start by using the first exploration loop. And every time you load from your desktop or from a folder, if you load this into FMod, it's going to make a copy, so your original files are intact. But don't keep loading it from the same place if you want to use the same thing twice, because it'll make a second copy and you're going to just be wasting space that the game might need. And actually, when you're doing this sort of thing, some of you might be wondering, like, okay, well, this is just a program to show off how you loop stuff. But actually, you can export this and build it into your game engine. And a lot of game engines are compatible with FMod, but if not, you can always build it as, into the programming language of the game. So let's get started by loading this into the project. Okay, so I actually had to go back and remove everything from the audio bin because the screen recording won't let me drag into the window. So we can actually, now I can show you how to drag it straight from where it came from. So let's go find our source, and I'm going to look at my looped waves, and we're going to use the exploration one. We're going to drag it right in here. Now you can see when I'm sliding this around, it's not snap to any grid, and it could be really important when you need tempo to make sure the loops jump from one loop to another seamlessly in time. In this case, we don't really need it, but it's a good habit to put it in. So what I'm going to do is right-click in this black space here, and I'm going to add tempo marker. And I know the tempo of this is 103. And now you can see it snaps to a grid and everything should be in time if we want to do jump transitions. In this case, we're not going to do that, but it's a good habit to put these tempos on here anyways. So the next thing we're going to add is another audio track. So I'm going to right click on here and add audio track. And let's add the second layer, which is Artemis 2. And we're going to do the same for the third one. So this might be a little crazy, but if I play this, it's going to play all 3 of them at the same time. This is kind of a good way to make sure It's not really ideal to play all these at the same time, but you can hear that all of these blend really well together, which makes the crossfading technique, the layer crossfading technique work really well. And we want to make sure this loops, so let's actually solo this. Let's solo this one. When it goes to the end here, it's not going to loop because we didn't set the loop region. So what we want to do is right-click on one of these, and we're going to set new loop region. And it covered this up, but you can actually drag this down, make more room for more stuff. All right, there we go. So now we solo this. When it goes to the end, it'll just go right back to the beginning. And like I said, having the tempo can help, because let's say you don't want it to loop the last 4 measures. So we can take that out and make sure it's perfectly in time. Otherwise, you'd have to free move it, so you can actually turn off the snap to the ruler. It's in View, Snap to Ruler. We can turn that off, and we can free move it, but then it might not be in time. We have to kind of eyeball it. And see, that was kind of weird. It was a little bit early, but if we snap to the ruler, we can make sure it loops in time. And assuming your whole complete WAV file is already looped seamlessly, you can just, right-click the whole thing. It'll automatically just loop the entire thing altogether. So now what do? We want to have this level of intensity change. We want a knob to control that. So up here, we can add an automation knob or a parameter knob. So we're going to add new parameter by just clicking on the plus tab here. And we're going to call this intensity level. So there we have it, intensity level. Well, what does this do? When we look at this, it goes from a value of 0 to 1. So 0.00 to 1.00. So I guess 0 to 100. And this is the value of this parameter knob. Well, when we're moving this around, nothing's happened yet. So what do we want to do? We want this to be playing only the first one, the first level of intensity. And let's actually go ahead and name these audio tracks to exploration. Encounter. High risk. And all we did was rename it. Nothing happened yet. So what we want to do now is control the volume levels. So how do we do that? Well, we have to create an automation with the volume. So we right-click and on the volume knob, and we add automation. And there's the automation. Now we can click and add points to our automation. So 0 dB is the max volume, or the original volume where the track is. So in the beginning, we do want this to be 0 dB. And over here is, let's say in the middle is where we want it to transition to the second one. So let's add automations for all of these and see how we do that. Okay, so at this point, we want the second track to be fully in. So we're going to add this automation there. But in the beginning, we want the second track not to play. But we don't actually want it to start fading in like that. So maybe we can add another point by just clicking. And we can kind of control the curves here. And you might have to play around with this. But at this point where the second track is in, the first track has to be completely out. And like I said, you might have to tweak this and play around with this a little bit. And the problem with fading in that some people have is that when you crossfade stuff, let's mute this. Let's play and see what happens here. When you crossfade stuff, sometimes there's a dip in the volume, and you don't want that. You want to make sure they crossfade without any sort of dip in the volume, that it's noticeable. Right here, it's a bit quiet, so we can actually curve this a little bit more hard. So let's see if this works a little better. So I'm going to make this a little bit longer. And I think that's pretty good. So now let's move on to the third one, and we want it to be, let's say, right here. This is when the third one is going to be fully in. We're going to make sure that's 0 dB, and we're going to curve that. It's a straight cross fade in here, but let's curve it this way. When you do it this way exponentially, it's a little bit rough. It comes in really strong. This way, I think this works the best. This sort of curve here, and we want to curve out that same way with this second track. Let's see how this works. Yeah, I think that worked pretty well. Let's see it from the beginning again. And you have to remember when this is when I'm moving this knob, remember that the game is going to control this, and ultimately the player is what's going to control this. So let's say, you know, you're just walking around and you start fighting an enemy. And then you defeat him. And then let's say you get into a really, really intense situation. And it sort of tapers out by going back. And this is something the game will control, and like I said, ultimately the player. Now let's look at the jump transitions really quick. We're going to make a new tutorial event here, jump. And let's just do two of those. Let's see if this will work this time. Nope, still doesn't want to work. We're going to get rid of these and load it from the original source like we did earlier. And like I said, when you drag these into here, it's going to make a new copy. So if you want to use the same track, take it from the audio bin. I have to do this because the screen capture won't let me drag from this bin for some reason. So let's do the first encounter. And let's just play with this loop here for a second. Like I said, we need to put our tempo, because we're actually going to be using tempo. And I remember I right-clicked in here. So we also need a new loop region for this entire thing. And there we go. New loop region, and this is in the way. And we need our second loop. And we're going to put some space between it, because we don't want to have them touch each other. Even if it won't actually do it, it just makes it a lot easier to deal with in the workflow. So we're going to leave one measure there, make sure that it's on the snap to the grid, and we're going to make a new loop region. Now this is important. We have to have a marker because we need to have it go somewhere. So we're going to go add marker, and we're going to call this exploration. And this is encounter. This is important because this is where the transitions are going to jump to, and it needs something to jump to. That's what the markers are for. So this one is called encounter. So first thing we want to do actually is make sure these loop seamlessly. Okay, that one seems to be working. And this last one here. All right, that's pretty good. Now, let's move this so they're all in the same place here. Move this down. Actually, and this area here, whatever's on top will have priority, and that comes that starts to matter when you have all these transition regions. Now let me show you when you add transition to exploration. I'm sorry, let's do encounter. So this will make it jump right there, right away. It'll just make it jump. And we don't want that because we want this to play forever unless something happens, which the player controls. So I'm just going to delete that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a transition region to the encounter. Now this doesn't fill up the whole thing, but since we do want it to happen at any given time, we'll do the whole thing. And remember, this is snapped to the grid. Now what happens when we play it, it'll jump right to it because this transition region is actually active. So what do we do now? We need to go back to that knob parameter. So we're going to add a parameter here. Let's call it transition. And that didn't do anything yet because we need to add logic to it. So telling it when to activate this. So we push this plus button here where it says logic, add parameter condition, and there's a transition knob that we made up here. We can actually call this whatever we want, but we called it transition. Now this green area is where stuff is going to happen, and it looks like stuff is going to happen no matter where the knob is. So let's actually make this knob, let's make it activated when it goes all the way to the end here. So when it goes all the way to the end, it's going to be activated. Let's try it. Let's try it from this track, sorry. So we're going to move it into this green area. Great, now that worked. So let's talk about why we had the tempo here. The tempo is here because we can set this to transition at any sort of timing. So it actually won't jump to it unless it's on the quarter note, on the half note, dotted half, or a full bar or full 2 bars. For this one, let's do half note because that seems to work a little better. It's a little less abrupt, and quarter note, it might be, kind of off on the beat. At least this is a little bit more even. So this is the quarter note. So now here's the problem. How do we make this one go back? Well, we do the same thing. Transition region to encounter. I'm sorry, delete that. Transition region to exploration. This is why we have the markers, because they have something to go to, something to point to. And somehow I already screwed this up because it's not on the measure. Let's put it back in the measure. All right, there we go. Now it should be lined up. Yep, now they're lined up with the measures. So now we're going to go back and add logic to this. And let's make it when the knob is all the way to the left. It's going to go to exploration. And the same thing, it's going to be happening on the the half note. So let's play this. And then now we're going to jump to the other one. And then now we're going to jump back. And we move the knob. Now let me show you why the markers are important. If we move the marker to the middle, we can start in the beginning, but when it jumps, it's actually going to go to the marker, not to the beginning of the track. The markers are what they listen to. So So now when we go to when we go to the encounter loop, it's going to go jump right here to the marker. So I'm going to turn up the knob, and it jumped right here to the middle instead of the beginning. The thing is, when it loops, it'll actually go back to the beginning of the loop. There might be some uses for that. I do have examples of that, but that's for another time. So for now, that's all there is to it for the Artemis demo. And I hope you guys like the tutorial, and we'll be talking about more FMod stuff soon. Thanks.